No airplane in American history looked less like a world beater than the F-4 Phantom. November 1961. Edwards Air Force Base. A ground crew chief named Sergeant Dale Harwick, and the records don't confirm his rank, only his name on the maintenance log, stood on the dry lakebed apron and watched a machine that offended every instinct he'd developed working on clean single-engine fighters. Two J-79 turbojets, wings bent upward at 12 degrees. A horizontal stabilizer angled 23 degrees downward, as if the tail had given up. No internal cannon. The Navy had built a fleet interceptor that looked like a committee designed it in the dark, and somehow McDonnell Aircraft had convinced the brass it could do everything. On that particular morning, Colonel Robert B. Robinson pushed a modified F-4B, designated Project Skyburner, past Mach 2.59 at 91,000 feet, 2.5 times the speed of sound. Faster than anything the Soviets had flying, faster than anything in the American inventory. The record stood. If this kind of story hooks you, the machines and the men behind them, a like and a subscribe keep this channel running. And if you've got a phantom story of your own, drop it in the comments. Crew chiefs, backseaters, anyone who touched one. Those stories matter. Between 1959 and 1962, the Phantom set 15 world records, time to climb marks that embarrassed purpose-built interceptors, absolute altitude, absolute speed, low altitude speed. The F-4 didn't just nudge past existing records, it buried them. Operation High Jump put the aircraft at 98,557 feet. Operation Sageburner sent it across the Mojave at less than 100 feet off the deck at 902 miles per hour. The British had tried something similar with the English Electric Lightning, a twin-engine interceptor meant to do one thing fast. The Lightning could climb, but it couldn't carry anything while doing it, couldn't loiter, couldn't multi-roll. The Phantom could. Anyway, the configuration worked because of geometry. Those bent wings, the dihedral, kept the aircraft stable at high angles of attack despite the enormous fuselage cross-section. The downturned tail compensated for the wing geometry. It looked wrong because conventional instinct said it should look wrong. McDonnell's engineers ran the numbers and ignored the aesthetics. The Navy's evaluation report from 1958 called the airframe ichthyological in appearance, their word, not mine. They compared it to a fish. Then, they ordered it anyway, because the performance data left no room for vanity. No gun, 2 seats, 2 engines, a radar nose the size of a bathtub. Every fighter pilot in the Air Force looked at it sideways. Within 5 years, they'd all be flying it. Herman Barkey sat in his office at McDonnell Aircraft in St. Louis and pitched something nobody asked for. The year, 1953. The Navy wanted an attack plane. Barkey, McDonnell's chief of aerodynamics, handed them a fighter instead. A big one. Twin-engine, 2-seat, designed from the first pencil stroke around the Westinghouse APQ-72 radar and 4 Sparrow missiles slung in semi-recessed wells beneath the fuselage. No bombs, no gun, no close-range anything. The entire philosophy fit on a napkin. Detect at range, fire at range, kill at range, go home. This made perfect sense if you worked in the Pentagon in 1954. The missile-age theology ran deep. Curtis LeMay's Strategic Air Command had already declared the manned bomber a nuclear delivery truck. Why would fighters need guns when the next war would last 20 minutes? Defense Research and Engineering published internal guidance calling the gun a weapon of decreasing relevance in supersonic combat. The Air Force's own Tactical Air Command fell in line. Their classified procurement memo from 1956, since declassified, used the phrase unnecessary weight penalty to describe a 20-millimeter cannon. Unnecessary. As if 6 pounds of trigger mechanism and 200 rounds of ammunition represented the design margin between victory and defeat. The smoke from a struck Sparrow motor on the factory test stand at Point Mugu smelled like burnt aluminum and cordite, a thin white trail curling off the rail into the Pacific fog. The missile worked, most of the time, under controlled conditions, against drones flying straight and level. Nobody tested it against a MiG-17 flown by a North Vietnamese pilot, pulling 6 Gs in a hard descending turn at 4,000 feet over the Red River Delta. That test came later. But that's where this story goes. Barkey's team refined the airframe through 7 major design iterations between 1953 and 1958. The Navy accepted it reluctantly. They'd wanted something smaller. The Air Force rejected it outright. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara forced the adoption in 1961 under his Commonality Directive, the same cost-efficiency logic that produced the TFX program and the M16 rifle. One platform for all services. The generals hated it on principle. The F-4 entered Air Force service carrying a doctrine that had never been tested in combat and weapons that had never been fired in anger. Both problems arrived on the same day. We had the greatest fighter ever built and no way to kill anything with it. Captain John Doglione, 808th Tactical Fighter Squadron, Tockley, 1966. After-action debrief, since declassified. The Sparrow needed a lock. Steady, sustained, nose-on radar lock. The pilot had to hold his aircraft pointed at the target for the entire missile flight time. 6, 8, 10 seconds of flying straight at a MiG that could see him coming. In Korea, 10 seconds bought you a burst and a break. Over Hanoi, 10 seconds bought you an SA-2 up the tailpipe. The missiles failed at rates that should have ended careers. Between 1965 and 1968, AIM-7 Sparrow achieved a probability of kill around 8%. 8. The AIM-9 Sidewinder did slightly better, 15%. Raytheon's own engineers expected 50. The gap between the test range and route package 6 was measured in funerals, and the MiG-17, that obsolete subsonic Korean War leftover the Pentagon had dismissed, sat inside the Sparrow's minimum range and stayed there. North Vietnamese pilots figured this out fast. They closed to gun range because they had guns. The Phantom didn't. SUU, 23 gun pods bolted to the centerline station, jammed in high G turns. The harmonization drifted. Accuracy degraded so badly that one wing commander at Ubon called the pod a morale device in his monthly readiness report. July 1967. A flash off the canopy rail, sun catching the polished aluminum of an AIM-9 leaving the rail, and corkscrewing into empty sky because the seeker head lost contrast against ground clutter. The MiG-17 rolled underneath and disappeared into the haze over Thud Ridge. The Phantom crew flew home with 4 empty stations and nothing to show for it. 45 Air Force Phantoms fell to MiGs during Rolling Thunder. The kill ratio dropped to roughly 2-to-1. In Korea, it had run better than 10-to-1. The Navy fixed the problem first. The Navy's answer arrived in March 1969. A small building at Miramar Naval Air Station, and a captain named Dan Peterson, who handpicked 8 instructors and called the program the United States Navy Fighter Weapons School. Top Gun. They didn't redesign the Phantom. They retrained the men flying it. The Air Force took longer. They bolted an M61 Vulcan rotary cannon into the nose of the F-4E, 20 mm, 6,000 rounds per minute, 639 rounds in the drum. The gun the 1956 procurement memo had called an unnecessary weight penalty added 749 pounds to the airframe. That weight penalty started killing MiGs over linebacker in 1972. The kill ratio climbed back above 4-to-1. 5,195 Phantoms rolled off production lines in St. Louis and Japan between 1958 and 1981. 11 air forces flew them. The Israelis used F-4Es to gut the Syrian air defense network in the Bekaa Valley in 1982, a mission the aircraft had never been designed for, executed 30 years after Hermann Barkey sketched his fish-shaped interceptor on a drafting table. The Luftwaffe flew reconnaissance Phantoms until 2013. The Turkish Air Force still operated them into 2021. Iran, which received 225 F-4Ds and Es under the Shah, reportedly keeps a handful mission-capable today. Sources conflict on the exact number. The production cost tells part of the story. A Navy F-4B rolled out at $2.4 million in 1961. Adjusted for inflation, roughly $23 million in today's money. The F-35A unit cost sits north of $80 million. The Phantom carried 18,000 pounds of ordnance on 9 hardpoints. The F-35 carries half that. Different eras, different threats, but the math is the math. An irrelevant detail worth mentioning. McDonnell printed the 5,000th Phantom's data plate in gold. Nobody seems to know where that plate ended up. The F-4E with its internal gun first flew in June 1967. The after-action summary from its first combat deployment to Korat in late 1968 listed the aircraft as fully mission-capable with integrated armament. 13 years after the Pentagon declared guns obsolete, Colonel Robin Olds, who flew Phantoms over Hanoi and never stopped arguing for the gun, put it plainly in a 1984 interview. "We asked them for a cannon. They gave us a theory.